In our last video on Acts chapter 3, we saw that the blind and the lame and those with other blemishes were strictly prohibited from entering the temple because of a precept in the Torah. This makes sense because the Jebusites, and this was an insult, mocked David and his army for having less self-awareness than those who are blind or lame. Now, we turn to Acts or Maseh chapter 6, and my position is that tithing is extremely biblical. We see in verses 1 through 4, now at this time, as the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint developed on the part of the Hellenistic Jews, or these would be the Reformed Jews, so people that weren't really devout in the Torah, against the native Hebrews, those devout in Torah, because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food, or in other translations it says the daily distribution. So the 12 summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, "It is not desirable for us to neglect the word of Elohim in order to serve tables. Instead, brothers and sisters, select from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task, but we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word." Notice that in order for there to be a daily distribution to the widows, there has to be some form of collection process, and the Torah of Moshe gives us the procedures for that collection process. And then we see that there's a division in the body, right? Okay, we're going to appoint men to make sure that this thing gets executed as we go to be priests and apostles and prophets and ministers of the word. In the Torah of Yahweh, we have something called the first tithe and the third tithe. So the first tithe would be one that is given to the priests or one that is given to ministers of the word. And the third tithe is one in which the widows and the poor and those who are less fortunate are benefiting from the material wealth gained by the nation. So in verse 18 of Bereshith or Genesis chapter 14, it says, "Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, Shalem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of Elohim Most High, and he blessed Avram, saying, Blessed be Avram by Elohim Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to Elohim Most High, or El Elyon," that's what it says in the Hebrew, "who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abraham, or Avram, gave him a tenth of everything." So going back to Acts or Maseh chapter 6, we see that there are some ministers who need to receive some form of full-time payment and are so busy to the point that they cannot pay attention to what I will show you that this third tithe is. Now, if we read Devarim or Deuteronomy, also meaning words in Hebrew, it's largely a repetition of what you see in previous parts of the Torah. It says in verse 12, "When you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce in the 3rd year," so this is the first tithe for the Levites, it was agricultural, "the year of the tithe you shall give to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. Then say to Yahweh your Elohim, I have removed from my house the sacred portion and have given it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all you commanded. I have not turned aside from your commands, nor have I forgotten any of them. I have not eaten any of the sacred portion while I was in mourning, nor have I removed any of it while I was unclean, nor have I offered any of it to the dead. I have obeyed Yahweh my Elohim. I have done everything you commanded me." So what we see here is that if one has not eaten of the tithe, or is not stolen of the tithe, or has not offered alms to the dead, then they have fully obeyed Yahweh. And then because of one's obedience, they have the permission to ask Yahweh for his blessing. It says in verse 15, "Look down from heaven, your holy dwelling place, and bless your people, Israel, and the land you have given us as you promise, on oath to our ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey." And you know what? Going back to Acts chapter 6, I agree with the Hellenist Jews, because if the Hebrews were actually concerned about their Torah, how come they're neglecting the disadvantaged? Because the tithe is there so that the disadvantaged can be taken care of. In Mark chapter 12, verses 42 through 44, we see the same exact problem. Now, there was a poor woman who gave all her wealth that she had left, which was very little, as part of a tithe. But of course, Yeshua is going to acknowledge that more than some average person who just puts a little bit of their money in a pot. But Yeshua undoubtedly is thinking, why is she in this position in the first place? Because if the nation of Israel was properly obeying the Torah, she would not have ended up in such a position. Clearly, there's a commandment by Yahweh not to neglect the poor. In Deuteronomy 15, verse 11, it says, "For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land." If this was being properly executed by the devout Hebrews in Acts chapter 6, the Hellenist Jews would not have needed to bring this up as a matter against them.